This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 286 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It's a bit of a trip report. It's about Melbourne, Victoria and sports travel, a completely new area for me. Before I start, let me pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast today, but also for the areas we recently had the privilege to travel to, which I'll feature in this episode, thanks to the Wurundjeri people and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, in the areas we also know as Melbourne and Phillip Island. These are all such wonderful parts of Australia. I was very grateful to visit them, and you'll hear more about my experiences there in today's episode. So we had a summer school holidays adventure covering Melbourne and Phillip Island. We actually only had to be in Melbourne for 5 days, but we decided to extend it and make it an even 2 weeks. Actually, I giggle because I learned about this concept from fellow thoughtful traveller Justin Watson, who recently discussed this in the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group. His excuse for adding extra destinations. He was talking about a trip he took and he said something like, it was a 3-week trip, so I decided to add a side trip to Bahrain to make it an even 4 weeks. So I'm going to adopt this habit of just making, rounding up a trip length. I think that's a great idea. But of course, jokes aside, it is also a great kind of thoughtful travel principle to travel more slowly or to take longer trips but less frequently. So I'm dividing this episode into 3 sections, which kind of reflect the 3 sections of our trip. And the first one is all about travelling for sport. And that sport was indoor soccer or futsal. So that's what it sounds like from the sidelines of a futsal tournament. And of course, I hope nobody is surprised to learn it wasn't me who was playing sport on our trip. I can walk all day, but never actually had the kind of sporting prowess that gets me picked for a state team. However, my fabulous 12-year-old Reuben did. So he was one of the goalkeepers for the under-12s WA state futsal team, and it was the National Fustal Tournament taking place in Melbourne. So that was really exciting. Obviously, under 12s is the youngest age group, so he and his teammates hadn't done anything like that before, and they got to stay in student accommodation separately from the parents who'd accompanied them. Well, we didn't really accompany them, I guess. We were shunned because 12-year-olds are basically teenagers. So we happened to be in Melbourne at the same time, and we did attend the tournament and cheer them on. But they basically were, well, I described it as my son living his best soccer life, just pure soccer all day, every day, and not much interference from his mother. Although their coach did take their phones off them at 9 p.m. every night, which I thought was very appropriate. Anyway, so travelling for a sporting event was, for my son to participate in particular, was something completely different. But it was a really cool way to travel and, really enjoyable. It's obviously great fun to watch them. I will say that the WA under-12s team made it to the quarterfinals, but that was it. They had some great games, but I think it's also hard coming from WA. We're a faraway state with a small population compared to some of the bigger states. So it's hard to imagine them, coming first, but it was just a wonderful experience for the kids. And I think, that's something that's really special. I also enjoyed it from a traveller point of view, because when you're spending a week going to a stadium for part of each day, I would go definitely for their game every day and sometimes to see some others, people I knew. But the rest of the time is kind of, wandering and trying to fit in catching up with a few friends. And also sometimes the coach would say, you can have the kids for a few hours. And so then we would, traipse around and eat something or go shopping for soccer-related equipment, etc. But it was not exactly like, me meeting and being a local, but it also wasn't like being a tourist. And we were in a shopping centre because he needed some extra tape, some extra sports tape, and those kinds of things were completely different to regular travel and kind of grounding. I think it was just really, really different and really fun. I highly recommend it if you ever get the chance to follow your kid, or if you get to be in a sporting event yourself. I say absolutely do it. My kid is now, he's so lucky, heading off to England later in the year on a soccer trip without me. So he's becoming very grown up. But I also am so pleased to have observed also for this Melbourne trip. But I know also when he goes to England that he's had, lots of really good travel experiences with me over the years. And I know that he will, take these kinds of extra trips in his stride. I don't need to worry about him, not knowing, not coping with being in a foreign country or not, or being worried or getting lost. I know he's super, super capable. So that is, a real bonus. So that was a completely different experience and heaps of fun. And once the tournament was over and some of the kids travelled on, some of them went back to Perth, but we decided to hang around a bit longer. And we actually took the bus down to San Remo, which is the little town right next to Phillip Island. So that is actually the sound of the birds at the knobbies at the end of Phillip Island. But I'll come back to that. First of all, our main impressions of Phillip Island is it's a really fun, family-oriented holiday island. To me, it was always, I knew of Phillip Island for the penguins, which we did get to, and I'll explain more in a moment. But I didn't really know much about it, and we had a great time there. So big thanks to Rachel, my friend who lives in San Remo and is a local and, knows all the ins and outs and, gave us lots of good tips. So we spent the day, most of our, main day in Phillip Island exploring some of the fun. We went to Panny's Chocolate Factory. I could never really go past a chocolate factory because I really do like chocolate. And we also ended up playing mini golf, Ruben's new obsession. But just for the record, I was the winner. Sorry, Rubes. But there's lots of those kind of family places as well, like a ropes climbing place and, things that you could definitely hang out with your family on a good summer holiday or probably any time of year, really. But for me, the best part of Phillip Island was absolutely kind of the natural areas. So those lovely bird sounds from the start were from the Knobbies, which is kind of the far end of Phillip Island, the furthest bit from the mainland, where you can wander around along the kind of the cliffs and, look out into the sea. And there was, as you can tell, birds everywhere, just absolutely gorgeous scenery, really, really lovely spot. And from there we could drive around the kind of the back road, the alternative route back to the Penguin Parade. And I have long heard about this. So in fact, my friend Rachel used to work with the penguins there. So I'd long known about it, long wanted to see this particular spot. And, of course, I'm always a bit wary about wildlife situations. And I'm no expert, but I'm pleased to report that my impressions are that they run this in a really appropriate and ethical way. So what happens is that before sunset, probably, an hour or two before sunset, you are allowed down to the beach on the corner of Phillip Island there. It's a ticketed event, so with the proceeds all going to conservation and work with the penguins. So there's a limited number, but having said that, it's, many hundreds of people are allowed down, but it's really restricted and organised as to where you can be. There's roped off areas and some kind of concrete step seating. We were on the beach near the front. We just happened to kind of arrive at the right moment. And then significantly before sunset hits, there are rangers who speak to the crowd, give us the rundown on how it will work when the penguins arrive. And there's some really strict rules. Absolutely no cameras or devices or screens of any kind at all. So the main point is that they don't want there to be any use of flash that could be, damaging the penguins' eyes or disorienting, etc. And they're really strict about it. I hope this is the case every night, but certainly what I observed was the ranger who was in charge of our section was really, really onto it. So you couldn't even use a device at all, even like a kid who's just trying to pass the time until sunset, really happens. There was a point where they said, nope, all devices away, nothing at all. And they patrolled that. They, pulled people up who were even if they were just playing a game, they said, nope, all devices away. So they were very, very strict about that. And that made me, really feel good about the kind of the wildlife angle. Plus, when the penguins did arrive, the rangers were very, really onto making sure people stayed really quiet, no big noises. And that's, pretty hard to do with a large crowd, but they were really good about that. So that's my impression of it. And obviously, I think in a perfect world, it would be better if there weren't hundreds of people on the beach watching the penguins arrive home. It's not a natural behaviour, but they were definitely, doing it in, I think, the best possible way that I can imagine. So the actual experience of seeing the penguins, this was, such a highlight. So I don't know if you've seen penguins return from the ocean before, but these guys, they're little penguins. I mean, that's their type. They're little and they're called little penguins. And so they're very, very cute and very little. And you would get one or two of them wash up, in a wave, and they'd kind of, they knew that their burrows are up the beach, but the beach is a bit open and a bit scary, and they've got to cross it to be able to get to the safety of their burrows. And so you'd see one or two pop up and they'd have a look around and think, oh, no, not yet. And they'd scurry back into the sea. And then, one or two more would pop up, same kind of thing. And gradually they'd get maybe, 4 or 5 in a group, just on the edge of the water. But then a nasty seagull would come along and just squawk at them, and they'd all turn around and run back into the water. So this would happen a few times. And then eventually you'd get a group, usually maybe like 8 to 10 penguins, who would kind of be enough to brave it, and then they would scurry, waddle in their gorgeous way up the beach and into where their burrows are. So, and that just repeated itself over and over for, I don't know, an hour and a half or so. The funny thing was, and I'm always surprised by this, a lot of people left after the first group of penguins. They were like, tick, I've seen penguins do that now, that's enough. And some of them, okay, they had young kids, and it's late by now, it's like after 9 p.m. Fair enough, but plenty of them did not have young kids, and I don't think they needed to go. They just were like, oh well, seen them now, off we go. And we stayed right until the very end. And, every group was different and, different things to watch each time. And it was just absolutely delightful. Thanks to the people leaving, we were very quickly in the front row in the correct corner to really get a great view of the penguins as they waddled past. So, I mean, it's great that people are just ticking that off and off they go. So, I highly recommend it. And if you get down to Melbourne, Phillip Island is not that far. We took a bus to get there. A public bus took 2 hours. Really nice, easy and pretty scenic trip. But if you rented a car as well, then it would be even quicker. And on Phillip Island itself, I must say, it is not very public transport friendly, and you probably need to have a rental car, more or less, or to join some kind of tour. I think a rental car would be nicer if you can manage it. So that's my tip there. Thanks again, Rachel, because we got to borrow her car. So that was super fabulous. It's so handy having friends all around the world. I really appreciate them. So that was Phillip Island and San Remo. And from there, we headed back to the middle of Melbourne. We left the city for an hour and this happened. So we went inside for an hour. Now it's pouring. It still makes me giggle to think of that massive rainstorm that came through. We always know that Melbourne is the city for 4 seasons in one day or in 1 hour, and we've gone in to eat dumplings from the sunshine and came back out to this incredible flood of water. So that's Melbourne for you, and I know and love it for that. You know, sometimes endless sunshine like we get over here in Perth can get a bit boring. So there you go. Also, my son loves wintry weather, so the rain was perfect. So everyone's happy. We decided to spend the last few days of our trip just soaking up Melbourne vibes. I love Melbourne. It's a city that I could easily live in. And one of my favourite things to do in Melbourne is eat. We have, a pretty good range of restaurants here in Perth, but in Melbourne, it's really, different kind of cuisines on overdrive and always significantly cheaper than here in Perth. So I always feel I can eat out more frequently there and not feel that I'm, spending all my son's inheritance. So we had lots of fabulous meals, several Japanese ones because that's a favourite of both of us. And we have a new Japanese favourite in Melbourne, so I will recommend to you Hakoya Izakaya on Lonsdale Street. It was right next to our hotel, more on that in a sec, and we observed the first night that there was a queue there for much of the evening. And if you see a queue at a restaurant in Melbourne, well, first of all, that's very Melbourne because it doesn't really happen in Perth. But also you can assume that it's probably a good place. And it was. So we got there early the next night, in fact, right on opening time, so we could be first in the queue. And it was worth it. It was I'm pretty picky. No, I'm not picky. I love all Japanese, but I have quite high standards of what I would give a high rating to because I lived in Japan for a couple of years. So I feel like I have some level of expertise. But I tell you, the agadashi tofu that I ate at Hakoya Izakaya is the best agadashi tofu I have ever eaten. I wish I could go back and have some more right now. Oh my goodness, it was amazing. And Ruben also agreed that it was a fabulous place. So it was also one of those cute places where you have, kind of a little booth and they have the kind of Japanese curtain hanging down so that you're in this very private spot. It was just great. So lots and lots of good food in Melbourne. We got to stay at the Voco Melbourne Central. So a friend recommended this one to me as having some more sustainability initiatives than most. It does have this amazing green wall of plants, like many stories high at its outside entrance, and no bottles of water, no plastic bottles of water. Instead, you can grab as many filtered tap water bottles in, glass bottles as you want, that kind of thing. You can even open windows, which is rare in a multi-story city hotel, so don't have to have the aircon on all the time, which I like. Much rather an open window. So those kinds of things there. Full disclosure that on this recommendation to Voco, we were given a discounted room as media travellers, so thank you for that. But I actually genuinely recommend it. Great location as well, and right next door to Hakoya Izakaya, the best Japanese restaurant I know. So that was a bonus as well. Lovely to have big views over the city. If I'm in a city, I really like to be able to have that kind of, sweeping view, I feel. I know I've spoken about that on the podcast before from back when we stayed in Kuala Lumpur a few years back, and just being able to have that overview is, I don't know, doesn't feel like freedom. I don't know exactly how to describe it. It just feels like we have that big view, and I feel, I don't know, just gives me a bit of a thrill, I suppose. The other thing that I did in Melbourne that I would recommend is going to the Immigration Museum. That was recommended by my good friend Catherine, and it was really interesting. We both enjoyed it. Obviously, there are many, many people who have migrated to Australia over the centuries for many reasons, and lots of different stories behind them. And it was just really interesting. I think, especially if you're from a nation of immigrants like Australia and many others, then you'll find stories that relate to lots of people for different reasons. And it's also, a really well put together museum with lots of engaging and interactive displays. Just, really, really interesting and in a beautiful old building. So highly recommend the Immigration Museum. And the last thing about Melbourne was that I got to see so many good friends. Not enough. There are still too many that I didn't get a chance to see because I'd probably need to spend 3 months there to do that. But it was fabulous. I should have shouted out earlier when I described the futsal tournament to my dear friends Carly and Adrian, who put up with me for the week while Ruben was staying with his team, and the best hosts ever. So thanks, guys. It was so good to see you. And yeah, thanks to everyone that I got to catch up with. You know, you all showed me your little corners of Melbourne, and I'm so sorry to everyone I didn't see. Next time, I promise. I love Melbourne. Did you get that message that I do love Melbourne? It's so lovely. Anyway, that's the end of this report. I actually have to head to the airport soon for another trip. Now, this is really naughty of me to travel again so soon, but heading to Sydney, so the other big Australian city, for a conference. So more on that in an upcoming episode. For this one, I'll leave a few links in the show notes. I'll definitely leave a link to the penguins at Phillip Island. Well, not to the penguins themselves, but to the information about them. But it's really easy. You can find it at penguins.org.au. I'll also leave links to the Voco Melbourne Central Hotel and to the Immigration Museum, both worth a look. Don't forget, come and chat with me. We have the Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers and the LinkedIn group for Thoughtful Travellers. I post different things in there and we have different conversations, but they're all great conversations. So there's links in the show notes to find those as well. And of course, for this episode, the show notes will be at notaballerina.com/286. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.